greetings from the Netherlands. I wish I could be there with all of you, but obviously circumstances at the moment have made that rather difficult. Why should everybody have their failure resume? Will I just kick straight into the presentation, or are we going to have
No.
a bit of back and forth first?
This was just a short presentation of the next. So
cool. In that case, everyone should have a failure resume because everybody makes mistakes, and we need to learn from them. And if we can learn from other people's mistakes as well, then that saves a lot of hassle.
Yes. After all, we were all human, and the mic is yours.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I can kind of hear myself in the background, which is really weird, but okay. I wish I could be there with you in person. I really would have loved to have been there. I know I have quite a few friends who are there today, and it would be great to be able to share a drink with you. I've been rather jealous watching the images of the different events, the different receptions that have happened over the week. Hopefully, I'll get to join you next year. We'll see. All right, I know this is the last talk that you're going to sit through before you go for dinner, so I should probably kick into it before you leave. Okay, my name is Andrew Hickson. I am the marketing manager at Ludeo. I was going to go into a lot of detail today on my failure resume and why I believe everyone should have one and why every company should have one. But in researching the concept of failure, I came across a fascinating example of failure that occurred not too far away from where you are today. Every week, I make a social media post for Ludeo called Word Fact Friday, where I explain the etymology of a word or a phrase. It's just a random piece of trivia that looks at how specific words or phrases have ended up in the English language. I love random bits of trivia, and I love stories from history. Now, one word that I covered a while back for Word Fact Friday is balaclava. Do you know what a balaclava is? You know, a ski mask, a ski hat. In Dutch, they call it a ski muts. But okay, so the name of that piece of clothing, a balaclava, it comes from their use in the Battle of Balaclava during the Crimean War in 1854. And it refers to a town near Sevastopol in the Crimea, where British troops initially wore their knitted socks with the holes cut out to try and keep their heads warm. And then homemade or handmade balaclavas were sent over to the British troops to help protect them from the bitter, bitter cold weather. Anyhow, this presentation is going to be about failure. Failure is quite possibly the strongest tool that organizations have when trying to better themselves in terms of their current processes and future trends. In 2009, a Stanford professor, Tina Seelig, blogged about how she required her students to write a failure resume. These resumes don't highlight what you'd usually find in a resume. So instead of compiling successes, they list personal and professional failures. And after each failure, she had her students reflect on what they had learned through that process. I know you might be asking, what's the point of such self-flagellation? The point is simple. The pain associated with fiascos and flops can help you learn much more from failure than success. And honestly, analyzing one's failures can lead to the type of introspection that helps us to grow, as well as to show that the path to success isn't necessarily a straight line. Like I said, I was going to focus a lot on my personal failures, so I'm going to run down through some of my experience with failures. I have quite a lot of experience with failure, but I'm careful not to spend too much time dwelling on the mistakes. In many ways, I've failed all the way to where I am today, so something's going okay. Now, today I am sitting in a room in the Netherlands and not in the Ukraine, so it's not all been good. For those of you who know me, you will know already that I'm not a linguist. I'm not a project manager. I'm not in IT. I'm quite useless when it comes to a lot of the stuff that localization companies do. I'm a frustrated writer or actor or director. I came to the Netherlands about 20 years ago to study international theatre and education in Utrecht. Now, the reason that I decided to study in the Netherlands rather than doing it in Ireland was because I failed to get into Trinity College Dublin's theatre course. Now, Trinity College is the most prestigious college in Ireland. And I'll never forget the interview process that I had to go through at Trinity to get into their Samuel Beckett School of Theatre or School of Creative Arts. The interview was set up in a way to make you feel as uncomfortable as possible. There were 3 interviewers, and each one took turns, or they jumped in and out, asking you about your experiences in theatre and in theatre productions. The twist to the interview process was that they also brought in the interviewers in groups of 3. So you had to sit there and wait while 2 other people were being asked their questions. So you had loads of time to sit and listen to their answers, or think about the questions that they were being asked and kind of go, Jesus, I didn't even think I'd be asked something like that. And while you're sitting there judging their answers, the thought dawns on you that, Jesus, there's going to be 2 other people sitting listening to my answers in a minute. And that's awful pressure to put on someone. I'll never forget the answer of the kid who was directly before me. He was asked, what's your latest experience in theatre? And he said, well, me and my friends are rewriting one of Socrates' works, but dare I say it, they're making it a little bit too much like a soap opera for my liking. And the 3 interviewers all went, and I just thought, what the fuck is this? So yeah, needless to say, I didn't get in. So I started a business degree at the local college in my hometown, Tralee, where I'm from. Dropped out of that after a year. It just wasn't for me. I was bored out of my mind. During that time, I dated a girl from the Netherlands who was studying in Tralee. We did just for about a month, but I found out in that time that I could study in English in the Netherlands. And I was really ready to go try something new, go somewhere new, go on an adventure. I was ready to leave Ireland. So I went to the Netherlands to study theatre and education in Utrecht. But that turned out to be dance-based theatre. And again, for those of you who know me, I can't dance to save my life. But I'd made the decision to leave Ireland and to go study abroad. And I told everyone I was going to go do theatre in the Netherlands. And I didn't want to go back to Ireland and explain that I'd failed. So I moved to Nijmegen. I worked in bars. I made a life here. I enrolled in a bachelor degree program. And I opened my own bar after I graduated, which went bankrupt. And then I ended up working for a translation company, and now I work for Ludeo. The bankruptcy is a whole different story, but there's a few people who've heard that already, so I'm not going to go into it. Very much a failure, but one that I learned a lot from. I believe that the vast majority of failures can be traced back to one core issue. Problem is the wrong word, but issue, and that's communication. At the University of Nijmegen, I eventually got my master's degree in cross-cultural communication. Now, in general, it's understood that the greater the difference between 2 people, the higher the likelihood that they will miscommunicate. Wahlberger von Raffer Engel, in a paper in 1988, discusses such difficulties in cross-cultural communication. If 2 people from different cultures can talk to each other in some common language, they will often mistakenly assume that they also hold the extra-linguistic features of communication in common. Each person may reinterpret their partner's intent in terms of their own cultural norms, which is not a drastically shocking thing to hear. It makes sense. However, people, when they're communicating within their own culture or further within their tight-knit social group, they may overestimate their in-group similarities. They may assume, if the thought even occurs, that of course everybody is experiencing the situation in the same way. Now, I've had people join my marketing team at Ludeo on and off over the last couple of years. I had somebody join recently. The marketing team now consists of about 5 people, all with different areas of specialization, from graphic design, Dutch copywriting, audio engineer and a photographer who can do Adobe Editor and stuff. Everyone has to be able to cross-pollinate. You've got to be able to cover for other people within the team. And the only way to make that possible is to work according to SMART principles. And SMART is one of these acronyms, which is, you have to roll your eyes, but it does make sense. So your communication needs to be specific, it needs to be measurable, it needs to be attainable, it needs to be relevant, and it needs to be timely. I can guarantee that almost every time we mess up, and we do mess up, or if something goes wrong, or if someone's left frustrated, or if we're all frustrated, it's because someone has skipped an element in the SMART principles. Someone has made an assumption that someone else will understand. There are lessons to be learned in our failures. Touching a hot stove will teach you never to touch the hot stove again. Nice and simple. But when it comes to the failures of complex systems, it's sometimes hard to know what went wrong and when. One of the most famous examples of failures in communication took place in the same war that gave us the balaclava. Now, if you'll bear with me, I'm going to delve into history. We're going to go back to 1854. A gently sloping valley near the village of Balaclava in Crimea. On one side of the valley, Russian troops with cannons. On the other side of the valley, Russian troops with cannons. And at the far end of the valley, yes, you've guessed it, Russian troops with cannons. This is the Crimean War. Now, with all their cannons, the Russians are firmly in control of the valley. They've just captured a bit more land and a few British cannons just down around here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but down here where the 3 dots are. But now the commander of the British forces, Field Marshal Lord Raglan, has ordered his cavalry to take those cannons back. General Raglan watches from a telescope from his viewpoint on a distant hilltop as his men on horseback ride towards the valley. So far, so good. Now they should turn and climb up a little slope to surprise the small band of Russians who are hauling off the heavy British guns. But they don't. They keep on going further and further down the valley, between the Russians on both sides and towards the Russians at the end. Oh, what the hell are they thinking? Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them. Poet Alfred Lord Tennyson famously described the charge of the Light Brigade. Generations of British kids have had to learn this poem about 600 horsemen and their suicidal charge. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death, rode the 600. Now, just to be awkward, and for the sake of historical accuracy, I just want to point out that there were actually 700 members of the Light Brigade. There was a Times journalist, the first war correspondent. He was on the hillside overlooking the battle, which is why we have such a descriptive explanation of what happened. When Tennyson was fact-checked by the journalist on the number of cavalry, he was pissed. He didn't want to change it to 700 because 700 would ruin the meter of the poem. It's not going to rhyme anymore. So he left it at 600. Forward, the Light Brigade. Was there a man dismayed? Not, though the soldier knew someone had blundered. And someone had blundered in a big way. I don't want to bore you with all of the details, but I do need to give you a little information about the 3 main characters in this blunder. We have an impatient young captain, a frustrated bullying lord, and an amiable old general. The Times war correspondent described General Raglan as a man with personal charm, a sweet smile, and a courteous, gracious, gentle manner. We actually even have a character reference from Florence Nightingale, who said it was impossible not to love him. He was not a very great general, but he was a lovely man. which is just such a backhanded compliment. The not a very great General Raglan had spent most of his long career as a number two, an assistant, if you will. Well into his 60s now, he was still new to the top job. He might have been a great administrator in peacetime, but now on the hillside in Crimea, it was 40 years since he'd last been on a battlefield, let alone commanded any troops. Now, General Raglan is hundreds of feet up on top of a hill, the Sapoon Heights. He has his telescope to his eye, and he's got a commanding view of the British soldiers all down below. It's like watching from a box in a theatre. It's all very exciting. In the distance, he can see the valley. The Russian troops are defending with cannons on the sides, on the slopes, and at the end. It's about 8 o'clock in the morning, and General Raglan will send 4 fateful orders to the cavalry over the course of that morning. He clears his throat and he dictates the first. Cavalry to take ground to the left of the second line of redoubts occupied by the Turks. Now, a redoubt, just very, very briefly, without doing a Word Fact Friday on it, a redoubt is a fort or fort system, usually consisting of an enclosed defensive emplacement outside a larger fort. It's meant to protect soldiers who are outside the main line of defense, and generally they're just holes dug in the ground. To get this order to the recipient, General Raglan has to send a messenger to ride the steep and winding path down the Sapoon Heights. Then they have to gallop across the plain to the brigades. It takes about 20 minutes to get the message from Raglan to the recipient. The recipient of the message is a man named Lord Lucan. He's in charge of the cavalry, which includes the Light Brigade, and he reads the message. Cavalry to take ground to the... This makes no sense. Why are communications sometimes hard to understand? The psychologist and linguist Steven Pinker reckons the biggest reason is the curse of knowledge. That's a curious cousin of the Dunning-Kruger effect. I don't know if you know the Dunning-Kruger effect, but with the Dunning-Kruger effect, we don't know what we don't know. With the curse of knowledge, we don't notice when we know something that others don't. The curse of knowledge was ingeniously demonstrated in an experiment, again at Stanford University, by a psychology student named Elizabeth Newton. She put volunteers into pairs and gave one of each pair a list of well-known songs. So choose a song, she said, and tap it out with your finger on a desk. So, for example, did you get it? No, it's okay, don't worry. We'll try another one. Did you get that one?
No.
Don't worry if you don't recognize the tunes. Don't feel bad. Very few listeners among Elizabeth Newton's experimental subjects managed to. They guessed correctly just 2.5% of the time. But here's the part that demonstrates the curse of knowledge. She asked the people who'd done the tapping, if we played your tapping to lots of listeners, how many would correctly guess the tune? The tappers reckoned around half of the listeners would guess right. But remember, hardly any listeners actually did, just 2.5%. The tappers were wildly overconfident in their ability to convey music using only taps. Why? Because in their heads, they weren't just hearing the taps, they were hearing this. I really hope, I didn't check this beforehand, I really hope the sound is coming through the presentation.
Yeah,
Because if not, I've just tapped like a retard again for a few more minutes. But
because
that was Hey Jude by the Beatles. That was what I tapped the last time. But when people are tapping, when you're in that role where you're the person to tap out your song, it's really difficult to imagine what it would be like to hear only the taps without the knowledge of which tune the taps are intended to convey. Much the same thing happens when an expert gives a talk full of confusing jargon, industry terms and acronyms. They don't realize it's jargon. To them, it's a bunch of very familiar words with perfectly clear meanings. We're working on a job at the moment for a client where we're making all of their infographics and videos to convey what they want to do over the next 10 years. And they keep talking about ambient food. And we keep going, what the hell is ambient food? Nobody understands these terms. Apparently, ambient food, it's food which is preserved, food which can be put in cans and sent out, doesn't need to be refrigerated. But they can't conceive of what it's like to be someone who doesn't understand. We spend quite a bit of time explaining how to communicate to clients with our project managers. It takes a while to realize that they need to have different communication styles, whether they're talking to other localization project managers or if they're talking to just someone who runs a small company and they're doing everything themselves, or if they're talking to communications managers for big companies or whatever. Not everyone needs this or knows the same words and acronyms and phrases. The curse of knowledge is a devilish one, says Steven Pinker. We do not notice the curse because the curse prevents us from noticing it. We sometimes forget that the person we're talking to might not have the context to make sure or make sense of anything that we're saying. We mean one thing, they hear something else entirely. So, down in the mouth of the valley, Lord Lucan reads General Raglan's message again. Cavalry to take ground to the left of the second line of redoubts occupied by the Turks. It still makes no sense to him. Redoubts occupied by Turks. There aren't any redoubts. So the redoubts were where the British cannons had been, guarded by their allies, the Turkish army, but the Russians had captured them already this morning. So the Turks weren't occupying the redoubts anymore. Still, that must be what Raglan meant. And then second line of redoubts. Isn't there just the one line of redoubts? Take the ground to the left. Whose left? What left of what? My left? Or Raglan's left? Where's he looking from anyway? Now, there's the curse of knowledge. Raglan had a perfect view. Up on the hilltop, up in the Sapoon Heights, he knew exactly what he meant by to the left. He forgot that Lucan, down below, had a completely different point of view. A more experienced commander might have made sure to write something his troops couldn't possibly misinterpret. East or west, for example, rather than left or right. The puzzled Lord Lucan is the second of our three main characters. He's the frustrated, bullying lord. Unlike the amiable old general, Lord Lucan is not a popular man. Lord Lucan had risen quickly through the ranks of the British Army, a lieutenant colonel in his 20s. Was this because of his military genius? Nope. If you were good at your job, you might hope to get promoted, but the only way to get to the top, to be sure to get to the top, was money. The British military sold off its top ranks to the highest bidders. That's why you have the phrase in English, lions led by donkeys. The British military sold off its top ranks to the highest bidder. Lucan was a lieutenant colonel because he'd paid to be one. Millions of euros in today's money. Lord Lucan soon got a reputation as a harsh, vindictive leader. He'd had soldiers flogged for trivial misdemeanors. But then Lucan stepped back from the army and he spent most of the last 2 decades running his family estate in Ireland. In County Mayo, directly north of my home, County Kerry, also on the west coast of Ireland. The small holders who farmed his vast tracts of land were struggling to pay their rent, and Lucan decided to modernize. He'd merge their small plots of land into bigger farms, which would be far more productive. But to do that, he first had to force out his existing tenants. And Lucan was pitiless. He hired gangs of 50 men to demolish his tenants' houses. When the potato famine hit, he kept going. Here's one survivor's account of the winter of 1846 in County Mayo. Sick and aged, little children and women, with child alike, were thrust forth into cold snows of winter. And to prevent the return, their cabins were levelled to the ground. The majority, rendered penniless by the years of famine, wandered aimlessly around the roads and bogs until they found refuge in the workhouse or the grave. Lucan was a bit of a prick. So Lucan, as I said, not a popular man. Now, back in the army, he had swapped the gangs in Ireland for cavalry in Crimea. And he was struggling to work out exactly where General Raglan wanted him to position his troops. He asked Raglan's messenger to stay with him while he finished the maneuver, just to make sure he understood what the general had in mind. And this time he had, but there were 3 more messages to come. Why would the British Army sell ranks to the highest bidder? It seems to make no sense. Wouldn't you want your army to be run by people who were best at running the army? But the purchase system did have some logic to it, at least if you were part of Britain's ruling class. This was a time of revolutions in Europe. If your army was run by capable soldiers from the middle or, God forbid, the lower classes, well, that was risky. The army might side with the people against the elite. By selling off ranks to the highest bidder, you made sure that that could never happen, because only landed gentry could afford to be in charge. There was, of course, an obvious downside to this, in that capable soldiers had to take orders from incompetent superiors, these aristocrats, like the amiable old General Raglan, or the frustrated, bullying Lord Lucan. Not surprisingly, the capable soldiers sometimes resented this. It's time to meet the 3rd and final man who'll play a pivotal role in our great blunder, the impatient young captain. Lewis Nolan is also up on the Sapoon Heights, with General Raglan waiting for his chance to shine. He wasn't the son of a lord. His father was a soldier and a diplomat. The sons of lords went to expensive private schools and studied the classics and ancient Greek and Latin. Nolan's school taught him far more practical subjects: engineering, military history, fencing, and horsemanship. Now, he quickly gained a reputation as the army's most brilliant horseman, and he quickly developed strong opinions on everything that the army was doing wrong. Still just in his 30s, he wrote a book, Cavalry, Its History and Tactics, and he couldn't resist the odd swipe at the posh buffoons in charge. Quote from his book: "Write up in golden letters in every riding school and in every stable, horses are taught not by harshness, but by gentleness. Where the officers are classical, the golden rule may be given in Greek as well as in English." This kind of snide remark didn't endear him to the higher ranks. Yeah, so they saw Captain Nolan's skills, but they also thought he was far too young to be publishing his opinions. A great man in his own estimation, one said. Or as we'd say now, he's a legend in his own bedroom. In the weeks before the battle at Balaclava, the British Army had made its way through Crimea, and the higher-ups made decision after decision that had infuriated Captain Nolan. Twice the cavalry came across unexpected chances to attack Russian troops, and twice Lord Lucan held them back. again in a quote from Captain Nolan's writings, there were 1,000 British cavalry looking on at a beaten army retreating within 10 minutes gallop of them. It was enough to drive you mad. The decision to be cautious wasn't Lord Lucan's fault. The orders came from General Raglan. Lucan was frustrated as well. Nonetheless, he got the blame, and he also got a nickname. Not so much Lord Lucan as Lord Look-On. Am I right? It's a different time. It wasn't fair, but it stuck. Lucan didn't want to be known as a dithering bystander. And there's another reason it irked him as he read General Raglan's first order of the day. It wasn't just that the meaning of the words from the first order were hard to understand, hard to parse. Once he had understood them, Lucan realized that this was yet another humiliating retreat. He had deliberately positioned himself and his forces close to where the Russians would have to pass if they were going to attack. Raglan was telling him to be cautious again, to move the cavalry further back. Back up at his vantage point, meanwhile, old General Raglan changed his mind. Perhaps Lord Lucan had been positioning his group, his cavalry, correctly in the first place. So, half an hour after sending the first order, General Raglan sends his second order. 8 squadrons of heavy dragoons to be detached towards Balaclava. That meant half of Lucan's cavalry, the heavy brigade as opposed to the light. Basically, all you need to know about heavy and light brigade. The heavy brigade are the ones on really, really big horses that carry all the equipment. Light brigade, smaller, faster horses, and they carry just one guy with one weapon. So another messenger on horseback gingerly picks their way down the Sapoon Heights, gallops across the field to Lord Lucan, hands him a slip of paper. Lord Lucan reads it and rolls his eyes. Great, now I have to move back to where I had been, but with only half his troops. That wouldn't help if they ran into any Russians, which of course they did. But luckily the Russians weren't expecting it. The two forces skirmished briefly, and the Russians retreated. Up on his hilltop, General Raglan spies an opportunity with the Russian retreat. Perhaps they could recapture those cannons that the Russians had taken earlier, the ones on the nearby Causeway Heights, the slope to one side of the valley. Raglan, being a cautious man, doesn't want to send the cavalry on their own. He'd rather wait for the infantry, the foot soldiers, to back them up. But where were the infantry? He had sent a message to their camp telling them to come right away. But as it happened, the urgency of General Raglan's message had been lost on the infantry leader. He had decided that they could finish their breakfast before setting off, but General Raglan didn't know that. He expected the infantry to come into view at any moment. And as Raglan sat there thinking about it, there weren't that many Russians near the guns on the Causeway Heights. The cavalry could probably take them on their own if needed. So Raglan dictates his third message of the morning. Cavalry to advance and take advantage of any opportunity to recover the heights. They will be supported by infantry, which have been ordered. So another messenger cautiously rides down the steep slope of the Sapoon Heights, gallops across the field, hands another slip of paper to Lord Lucan, and Lord Lucan expresses another exasperated sigh. It will be supported by infantry. What does that mean? Does he want us to advance now and hope that the infantry arrive later? Or are we supposed to wait for the infantry to arrive and then advance? Now, Raglan had meant advance straight away. Lord Lucan decided that he should wait for the infantry. And there was still no sign of them. So the cavalrymen decided that they might as well relax for a while. They all climbed off their horses, they lit their pipes, they unscrewed the tops on their flasks of rum. Some of them had hard-boiled eggs from breakfast. So they all sat out and had a lovely morning. Up on the hillside, General Raglan is watching this, going apoplectic. Uh, why are the cavalry smoking and drinking? He told them to advance. He turned the telescope and looked towards the captured British cannons on the heights. Could he see Russian soldiers starting to drag those cannons away? That's what it looked like. There was no time to lose. In the 19th century, the loss of field guns was considered a humiliation, so it could not be allowed to go unchallenged. Raglan dictated his fourth and fatal order. Lord Raglan wishes the cavalry to advance rapidly to the front, follow the enemy, and try to prevent the enemy carrying away the guns. Raglan wanted the message to get to Lord Lucan as quickly as possible. So he looked around him at the horsemen who were up there on the hilltop, up in the Sopmoon Heights, and who amongst them would be the swiftest. He decided to send Captain Nolan. The impatient young captain eagerly took the message, geed up his horse, and he was out of there. Raglan shouted after him, "Tell Lord Lucan that the cavalry is to attack immediately." At last, Nolan is buzzing. This is fantastic. After weeks of frustration, finally the cavalry have something to do. And Nolan, he's going to be the one to deliver the message, the order to that fucking idiot, Lord Lucan. Captain Nolan urges his horse to slither and stumble down the steep side of the Sopmoon Heights, gallops the last mile across to Lord Lucan, and thrusts the message into his hand. Advance rapidly to the front. Lucan, which front? Prevent the enemy from carrying away the guns. Which guns? Nolan watches Lucan trying to figure it out, and his patience snaps. General Raglan's orders are that the cavalry should attack immediately. Again, Lucan's just, attack what? What guns? Where and what to do? There, my lord, there is your enemy, there are your guns. Now Nolan sweeps his hand out in a general direction of what exactly? To Lucan, it looks like Captain Nolan is pointing right down the valley towards the Russian cannons, arrayed at the far end. There is your enemy? There are your guns. So Lucan takes a deep breath. Back up on the hilltop, General Raglan is oblivious. It simply hadn't occurred to him that there could be any ambiguity about what he wanted. Obviously, his fourth order was a follow-up to the third. You know, the one where he said, recover the heights. So when he said, advance to the front, he meant the heights, obviously. And when he said the guns, he meant the British cannons that had been captured on the heights. That was obvious, wasn't it? Well, not to Lord Lucan. All he heard was, now, to tie all of this back into to me and my experiences, I got my master's degree in cross-cultural communication. And in the first year or two of the study, we spent a huge amount of time getting to know a Dutch psychologist, Geert Hofstede. In the 1960s and 70s, IBM employed Hofstede to fly around the world, asking questions of their employees in different countries. Questions like, how frequently in your experience does the following problem occur? Employees being afraid to express disagreement with their managers. IBM wanted to understand how workplace culture differs from country to country. Were people collectivist or individualist, sticklers for rules or happy to improvise? And what was their attitude to authoritarians? Hofstede came up with the idea called power distance. Basically, in a country with low power distance, an employee who gets an apparently stupid instruction feels free to say, "Are you sure?" Where the power distance is high, the employee silently takes a deep breath and carries out the stupid instruction. In Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, he describes how countries with high power distance used to have more fatal plane crashes. Captains and first officers spent the same amount of time at the controls, but crashes would happen more often when the captain was flying. If the first officer was flying badly, the captain would tell him. If the captain was flying, the first officer might not. Just for the interpreters, I'm going to jump ahead ever so slightly because we are running out of time. Airlines now train their pilots how to speak up. All around the world, they've learned that in these power distance countries, it can be very, very important to train people who are not used to doing it to speak up if they think the captain is making a mistake. On the battlefield in Balaclava in 1854, there was no such training. The curse of knowledge had set the blunder in motion, and now power distance was about to seal the deal. It seemed to Lord Lucan that General Raglan wanted the cavalry to embark on a suicidal charge down the valley. Well, then that's what they'd have to do. Alfred Lord Tennyson's poem sums up the lot of the soldier. There's not to make reply, there's not to reason why, there's but to do and die. Actually, Lord Lucan would have had some scope to make reply and reason why, but the power distance here was complicated. Lucan outranked General Nolan, but Nolan was speaking on behalf of General Raglan. Lucan couldn't refuse Raglan's order, but he could have pressed Nolan to explain it to make sure he understood. That's exactly what he had done with the first messenger, who delivered the ambiguous first order to move the troops to the left. But this time he didn't. Perhaps he was angry about the insolence with which young Nolan had addressed him. Perhaps he was worried about how it would appear. Lord Lucan, wriggling out of action once again. At any rate, he simply glared at Nolan and then rode off to talk to the Light Brigade. Now, they were the closest in the valley. They'd have to lead the charge. The leader of the Light Brigade was a man named Lord Cardigan, another wealthy aristocrat who had bought his position. Cardigan had only just appeared on the battlefield. He wasn't camping with the soldiers. He'd had his yacht sailed over from England and was moored in a nearby harbour. It's insane when you think about it. He often pitched up late after a good night's sleep and a leisurely breakfast. He had the nickname of the Noble Yachtsman. He was also Lord Lucan's brother-in-law, and they hated each other. So Lord Lucan delivers the message. Lord Cardigan, you are to advance down the valley with the Light Brigade. I will follow in support with the Heavy Brigade. Cardigan can just look up and down and go, okay, but allow me to point out to you that the Russians have battalions in the valley at the front. And they have battalions on the left and on the right. And Lord Lucan can just reply that, yeah, but General Raglan will have it. We have no choice but to obey. So Cardigan readied his troops. Every last one of them could see how fucking insane this was. That it could achieve nothing and that they'd need a miracle to survive. The soldiers knew someone had blundered, but they were soldiers and orders were orders. So the bugle sounded. Cardigan kept a steady pace. There was about 1.5 miles, maybe close to 2 kilometers to the end of the valley. So the horses couldn't charge at full pace all the way. But one soldier seemed impatient. He broke ranks and rode out to the front. It was Captain Nolan, of course. What was he doing? Perhaps he had only just understood the blunder that was about to unfold and was trying to change the Light Brigade's direction. Perhaps he was just being an impatient little prick and wanted to be front and centre. We'll never know. No sooner had Captain Nolan ridden ahead than a Russian shell exploded right in front of him and a shard of hot metal ripped through his chest. Nolan was the first to die, but he wasn't the last. Up on the Sapoon Heights, General Raglan watched dumbfounded as the Light Brigade disappeared at full pelt into a bank of smoke. The Times war correspondent scribbled furiously in his notebook, and a French commander, General Bosquet, delivered a verdict for the ages. It was magnificent, but no way to wage a war. When the smoke had cleared, 1 in 6 of the Light Brigade had been killed. more were captured or wounded. Miraculously, more than half made it back with barely a scratch. But the charge had achieved precisely nothing. The loss of life and limb was senseless. From our modern perspective, so was the whole Crimean War. This is going to be a very swift right turn to round out the whole thing because it's dinner time and I know you need to go. Keeping a failure resume or anti-portfolio or CV of failures, or as we call it here at Ludeo, CAPA, corrective and preventative action list. It's simple. When you fail, write it down. But instead of focusing on how that failure makes you feel, take the time to step back and analyze the practical operational reasons that made you fail. Did you wait until the last minute to work on it? Were you too casual in your preparation? Were you simply out of your depth? Did you make assumptions in your communication? Did you fall foul to the curse of knowledge? If you take only one thing away from this presentation, I want it to be this. Learning from your own failures and mistakes is crucial. It's life affirming. It's a critical pit stop on the road to success in every facet of your life. Learning from the failures of others and their mistakes is far less painful. Thank you very much for your attention and enjoy the rest of the evening. I look forward to seeing your photographs and videos tonight. I won't be jealous, I swear. If you enjoyed that, I am giving another talk tomorrow. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thanks, guys.
Hickson, you red teddy bear. You did it again. You freaking did it again.
How are you doing, sir?
Very good. Better now, actually. You know what we were speaking about before you?
No.
No? Can you guess? Machine translation. This is the best.
Oh, really?
This is the best of the best. Finally. Finally, we have some Hickson here. Well done.
Thank you very much, sir. You always make me blush.
Show it. Anyway, so... вопросы? У меня был, наверное, один вопрос, да? What the hell was that all about?
Exactly, yeah. It's about the fact that I'm a trivia nerd. I'm a geek, and if I can find something that I think if you can make a complex thing or complex topic interesting, people can understand it. And I want to talk about complex things, complex systems, the curse of knowledge. But the only way I would like to hear it is if it's done in a way which is fun. So I try to do it in a way that's entertaining. It could be long-winded and a bit waffly. I'm not sure. But it's just really important to learn from your mistakes. And I think so many mistakes, so many failures that people have and experience comes back to misunderstandings or assumptions and assuming that somebody sees things from the view. And geez, it's so important to understand that there's other people in their team, even if they speak the same language from the same town, same age group, they could be the most dangerous places to make mistakes because you don't have the automatic warning signals on that you should be aware that maybe they won't understand this. So maybe I need to be a little bit clearer than I would normally be. Geez, you're right. That whole presentation could have been much shorter.
No. Well done, well done. Arina wants to ask you a question. How weird is it that I'm standing here talking to you, right?
It's very strange, but I love it.
Я ризикну залишити.
Okay, at the risk of preventing you from having dinner altogether, just a quick question. Do you think those characters learned anything from that story, and what happened to them?
What happened to those people? What happened to them is one of the reasons why the story popped up on my radar, because it was treated like, now, okay, I'm going to sound like a very bitter Irishman now. The British have a habit of glorifying or having these glorious defeats. So what happened? There was hearings. There was hearings in the House of Commons in the UK to figure out what had gone wrong, who had made the mistake, and how it had been allowed to happen. But instead of really going into the detail and learning too much from it, there was a massive PR, a massive spin put on it, where the charge of the Light Brigade was held up as an example of, look at how brave these men were. Can you imagine the bravery to go and do that? I mean, Jesus, they rode down the valley. They knew that they were going to die, but they did it anyway for king and country, which is just insane. But it's how so many battles and defeats are dealt with. It was spun, and that's my opinion. The poem by Tennyson is about this glorious defeat and how fantastic these soldiers were. And again, it all comes back to that phrase, lions led by donkeys. The soldiers were fantastic. They were intensely brave. But the people they were being led by were just idiots. Yes.
Hello, Andrew. Thank you for your very metaphorical presentation and a deep historical perspective. I would like to ask you a question, since you mentioned your background in cross-cultural communication. Have you heard of the book by Erin Meyer, The Culture Map?
It's here. Yes, it's...
So can you please comment on it? Is it deep enough? Does it reflect what you were talking about well?
It does. It's basically a step on from Hofstede. So Geert Hofstede would generally be considered the father of this type of cross-cultural communication analysis. So what he did was groundbreaking at the time, but it's very much out of date. It's been built on by people like Erin Meyer. She goes into more detail. There's some fantastic examples in the book. There are other people, there are other writers that have taken it further, and with the problem with the book, like with Erin Meyer's book, is it's already 15 years old or so. So there has been a lot of progress in research into cross-cultural communication. There's been a lot of changes in the world because of how we communicate. The amount of the speed up in how we communicate and how we work in teams over the last 15 years has been massive. I mean, I work on a team. I'm Irish, but I work in a Dutch team in the Netherlands. We don't have offices all over the world, but we have 6 or 7 different nationalities in our team. And that's not to start thinking about all the different nationalities that we communicate with daily, whether it's with clients or with customers or partners or freelancers.
Ding, ding, ding. That's your time up.
Okay. Yes, Erin Meyer, the book is very, very good. If you don't know it, it's well worth the read. It's very entertaining. But we've moved on. There's so much more to do and so much more to learn because we're constantly changing.
By the way, TransPerfect brought Erin Meyer to their conference last month, and I met her. That was fun. They could do it. They have enough money, right? They have unlimited money.
I'm quite jealous.
That's it. So we get a signal that we are going to disconnect you. But you're always going
I was going to say, sorry, I just want to interrupt and say, very, very well done for managing to sit there for those extra 10 or for the entire hour. I know that dinner started being served half an hour ago. So God bless you all for staying with us.
Andrew, I just wanted to tell you, we're going to disconnect you, but you'll always stay in our hearts.
Likewise. Thank you very much, guys. See you tomorrow.